Hi, this is Kathy Lewis at Tall Tree Designs, and today we're going to be talking about knitting in the round using the magic loop technique. I love this technique because oftentimes when you're knitting in the round, it can be a little bit of a struggle, especially if you're knitting something smaller in diameter. When you've got tons of stitches on your needles, it's very simple to knit in the round. But when you've got a small number of needles like this, and this is a very small number, I give you that, but even more than that, it can be hard to stretch the work to fit on the needles that are available. Some people will use double pointed needles to do this, and that's using 4 to 5 needles and dividing the stitches equally amongst them. But I found that a little hard to manage when I was learning to do this, and so the magic loop technique was a godsend for me. It's just much simpler for my way of thinking. And the way we do it is this. So I've cast on a small number of stitches to a fairly long circular needle. And you're going to see why longer is better in this technique. If your needle is only slightly bigger than the size you would need to accommodate your stitches, you're going to struggle a little bit with it. So having that extra length of cable is essential, and you'll see why in a second. So these are my stitches that I would like to join and knit in the round, and they're currently on one side of my needles. The first thing I'm going to do is slide them onto the cable between the needles to about the middle, and then about halfway through my stitches, I'm going to pull those stitches apart, bend the cable so that I can grab it and pull it to create this loop. Okay, and now I will slide the stitches equally onto my top and my bottom needle, just like that. Okay, so from this point on, I'll be referring to the top needle and the bottom needle. We are going to be knitting first the stitches on our top needle, and in order to do that, we're going to pull the needle on the bottom so that the stitches on the bottom needle are on the bottom cable. We're going to leave this loop sticking out to the left, and now that they're off the needle, we can bend and we can work with our bottom needle in order to knit these stitches on top. So I'm just going to knit all the stitches. You would do whatever your pattern calls for, and I'm going to knit all the stitches on my top needle. When I get to the end of those stitches, I'm going to rotate the whole thing clockwise. So now my top needle becomes my bottom needle, and my bottom needle becomes my top needle. Pull on the cable on top to reposition those stitches onto the top needle. Then pull your bottom needle out so that the stitches slide onto the wire, and again, you've left a loop on the left and you've got a little bit of mobility on the right. And we're going to again knit all the stitches on the top needle. Knit one, knit two, and this is important because it's connected here. We're going to give this working yarn a good tug after that second stitch, and that's going to keep the gap from getting too loose and creating what we call a ladder, which looks sloppy where the two parts of the work are joining together. Here we go. Again, rotate the whole thing clockwise. Slide those stitches on top onto your top needle. and pull the bottom needle out so that the stitches on bottom go onto the cable. And now here, we haven't joined these yet. And all we have to do is exactly what we did before, is knit those first 2 stitches, and then give our working yarn a good tug to keep the join from looking sloppy. And that is the whole technique. You're always knitting from your top needle. You're keeping a loop of cable at either side of the work. When you finish the top stitches, rotate, slide the top stitches onto your needle, the bottom stitches off onto the cable, and continue, remembering to give your yarn a little tug after the second stitch every time you change needles to prevent laddering. And we did that nice and slow, and it might seem complicated, but I promise you, once you've done a couple of rounds, you'll get into a rhythm and you won't even think about it. And basically, you'll be knitting in the round, creating a tube of fabric. So this is great for knitting socks. It's great for knitting sleeves. I often call for it in my patterns at Tall Tree Designs when we're knitting a neckline, picking up stitches around a raw edge and creating some kind of a nice border. I just find, rather than fussing trying to get the exact right length of needle, that Magic Loop saves me time and effort. And that is how you do that.